At 7:21 on the evening of May 6, 1937, 2 ropes dropped from the nose of the Hindenburg. Below, more than 200 men waited on a wet field at Lakehurst, New Jersey. Above them hung the largest aircraft ever built, 800-foot silver shape, nearly 3 football fields long, holding 7 million cubic feet of hydrogen. The flight from Germany was almost over. The engines were idling. Passengers crowded the windows to watch the landing. 8-year-old Werner Donner stood with his mother, his brother, and his sister. His father had gone to retrieve a movie camera. 4 minutes passed. Then a flame appeared near the top of the tail. The stern lost lift and began to fall. Fire moved forward through the ship faster than anyone could run beneath it. The nose tilted toward the sky. People jumped from windows while they were still dozens of feet above the ground. From the first visible flame to the impact of the main hull took an estimated 32 seconds. The Hindenburg had crossed the Atlantic in 3 days. It had made more than 60 successful flights. It had carried thousands of people without mishap. And in half a minute, it became the image by which an entire technology would be remembered. The Hindenburg was not a balloon with a cabin hanging beneath it. It was a rigid airship, a vast, lightweight skeleton of duralumin rings and girders covered with fabric. Inside that frame sat 16 separate gas cells. The cells supplied lift, while 4 diesel engines pushed the ship through the air at a cruising speed of about 75 miles per hour. At 803 feet long, it was more than 3 times the length of a modern Boeing 747. Its passenger rooms were built inside the hull, not in the control car below it. Dining and writing rooms, long windows, compact cabins, and even a pressurized smoking room behind an airlock. It was luxurious, like a fine train or ocean liner, polished service and elegant public rooms, with small private cabins designed mostly for sleeping. Passengers ate at linen-covered tables, while the Atlantic moved silently beneath their windows. This was no fantasy project. In 9 months, during 1936, the Hindenburg flew more than 55 times, crossed an ocean 34 times, and covered more than 190,000 miles. It carried passengers, mail, freight, and the promise of regular intercontinental air travel. That promise also belonged to Nazi Germany. The Zeppelin Company needed state money to finish and operate the ship. The regime wanted a flying demonstration of German power. Swastikas covered the tail fins. In August 1936, the Hindenburg circled the Berlin Olympic Stadium, low enough for the crowd to see it clearly, its hull painted with the Olympic rings. Technology, commerce, and propaganda traveled together. But beneath that image of control was a compromise made before the ship ever flew. The Hindenburg had been planned to use helium. Helium could lift an airship, but it would not burn. Problem was supply. The United States controlled nearly all of the helium available in industrial quantities, and a 1927 law restricted its export. Hugo Eckener, great organizer of German passenger airship travel, tried to secure an American supply and failed. The Hindenburg was therefore adapted to use hydrogen. Hydrogen offered more lift and was easy to produce. It was also extremely flammable when mixed with air. The danger was obvious, but it did not make disaster inevitable. Hydrogen had been used in German passenger zeppelins for years, and the gas was kept away from ignition sources by elaborate operating rules. The smoking room is remembered because it sounds insane. In practice, it shows the lengths designers took to manage the hazard. Cigarettes and lighters were confiscated before boarding. Electrical systems were shielded. The gas cells sat within a ventilated frame. The system worked until something created both a hydrogen leak and a spark in the same place at the same time. That does not absolve the engineering. Any safe system must account for failures. Once enough hydrogen accumulated inside the hull, the margin for recovery was vanishingly small. An enormous reserve of chemical energy sat directly above the passengers. But the important distinction is this. Hydrogen explains why the fire became catastrophic. It does not, by itself, tell us how the fire began. The Hindenburg left Frankfurt on the evening of May 3, 1937. It carried 36 passengers and 61 crew. This was its first scheduled North Atlantic trip of the new season. Headwinds delayed the crossing. On May 6th, a thunderstorm passed over Lakehurst, and the station advised the ship to wait. Captain Max Pruss cruised along the New Jersey coast until conditions improved. Newsreel cameramen were on the field because the arrival was an event. Chicago radio reporter Herbert Morrison was there with sound engineer Charles Nielsen. They were not broadcasting live. They were recording the landing for later use. Shortly after 7, the ship returned. Light rain was falling. The relative humidity was reported at 98%. Lightning was visible in the distance, though none was seen over the field. The approach was a flying moor. Hindenburg would hover high, drop ropes, and be winched down to the mast. At 7:21, the bowlines fell. The ship was still roughly 180 feet above the ground. The Hindenburg had become tail-heavy. Crewmen moved forward, and water ballast was released to bring it level. Rainwater may have contributed, but Hugo Eckener later testified that the condition seemed too severe to dismiss so easily. It may have been an early sign that a rear gas cell was losing hydrogen. The crew had no instrument sensitive enough to warn them quickly. Investigators learned that a cell could lose hundreds of cubic meters of gas before the control car indicator clearly registered the change. On the ground, the landing lines became wet. The metal frame of the airship and its outer fabric may not have equalized their electrical charge at the same rate. Somewhere above the stern, free hydrogen was mixing with air. Then came the spark. No camera captured the instant of ignition. Witnesses first saw flame high on the ship, near gas cells 4 and 5, just ahead of the upper tail fin. Men inside the stern heard a dull detonation and saw a bright reflection. One crewman compared it to the sound of a gas stove igniting. Then the gas cells disappeared in the heat. The ship did not explode like a bomb. It burned with extraordinary speed. As the rear gas cells lost lift, the stern settled and the nose rose. Flames raced forward through hydrogen, fabric, fuel, and furnishings. The structure broke as it came down. Herbert Morrison's practiced delivery collapsed with it. His recording became one of broadcasting's most famous documents, remembered for 3 words. Oh, the humanity. But listeners did not hear them as the disaster happened. Portions first aired the following day. Film and sound were later combined in newsreels, making the catastrophe feel almost live. What those images obscure is how many people escaped. Of the 97 aboard, 62 survived. Some jumped as the hull neared the ground. Others climbed through broken windows. Members of the ground crew ran toward the wreckage as well as away from it, pulling injured passengers and crew from the fire. Werner Dana's mother, Matilda, dragged her children to a window. She pushed Werner and his brother Walter out from a height of roughly 50 feet, then escaped herself when the ship had fallen lower. Werner's father, Hermann, and his sister Irene died. The camera sees one enormous object disappear in flame and suggests nobody inside could live. But the Hindenburg descended in stages. For some, there was a narrow interval when the floor came close enough to the ground to make escape possible. 35 people aboard died, 13 passengers and 22 crew. A civilian member of the landing party also died from his burns. Final toll was 36. The wreckage was placed under guard. American and German investigators interviewed witnesses, studied photographs and film, examined the structure, and considered an extraordinary range of theories. Sabotage was an obvious suspicion. The Hindenburg was a symbol of Nazi Germany, and there had reportedly been threats. The FBI and official inquiry investigated, but found no direct evidence of sabotage. The United States Department of Commerce reached a more prosaic conclusion. Hydrogen had leaked from a cell near the upper stern, mixed with air, and was most probably ignited by an electrostatic discharge. That remains the leading explanation, but leaves 2 questions. What damaged the cell, and exactly where did ignition occur? A bracing wire or control cable may have broken and punctured a cell, A valve or the cell material itself may have failed. The tail-heavy condition suggests a leak, but does not reveal its cause. The wet landing ropes and charged airship provide a plausible path to a spark, but the spark left no evidence that could survive the fire. The outer covering was combustible and helped spread the flames. Later claims that the paint, on its own, acted like rocket fuel are disputed and do not remove hydrogen from the chain. Investigators found accumulated hydrogen and air where the fire first appeared. So the honest answer is not that the cause is completely mysterious. Most of the sequence is well supported. A leak, a flammable mixture, an ignition, then rapid fire. The uncertainty lies in the first link and the exact nature of the spark. It is often said that the Hindenburg single-handedly ended the airship age. That gives 32 seconds too much power. Rigid airships were already losing their argument with the future. They required vast hangars, expensive infrastructure, and ground crews numbering in the hundreds. Their enormous frames were vulnerable to bad weather. Britain's R-101 had crashed in 1930, killing 48. The American naval airship, the Akron, went down in 1933 with 73 deaths. The Macon was lost in 1935. Helium did not solve every problem. Both the Akron and Macon used it. A non-flammable lifting gas could prevent a Hindenburg-style fire, but it could not make a fragile 800-foot structure indifferent to wind, storms, or operational error. Airplanes, meanwhile, were becoming faster and more capable. They needed runways, but not an army of handlers waiting at the mooring mast. War was approaching, and a huge, slow target had little future in contested skies. The Hindenburg did not create those disadvantages. It revealed them in the most visible way possible. The older Graf Zeppelin was withdrawn from passenger service. A sister ship, the LZ-130, was completed, but never carried passengers across the Atlantic. Germany still could not obtain American helium, and Hugo Eckner would not risk another hydrogen-filled passenger service. In 1940, the remaining great German Zeppelins were dismantled for their metal. The dream did not end because nobody could rebuild the machine. It ended because nobody could rebuild public trust before faster technology, and war closed the opportunity. The most famous fact about the Hindenburg is the fire. The more revealing fact is that it worked. For one season, passengers crossed oceans in a machine longer than most skyscrapers of its day were high. They ate dinner above the clouds, wrote letters in a flying post office, and watched cities appear beneath panoramic windows. The ship completed voyage after voyage, until an invisible leak, an invisible charge, and a brief flash exposed how little margin the system possessed. That is why the Hindenburg remains more than a warning about hydrogen. It is a warning about successful systems. Repeated success can make a dangerous compromise feel settled. An emergency that has never happened begins to look like one that cannot happen. Then small uncertainties align, and a machine with years of proof discovers that proof is not protection. 8-year-old Werner Derner survived the fall from the window and lived until 2019. For decades, he rarely spoke about Lakehurst. The public remembered the silver ship, the flames, and the voice on the recording. Remembered his mother pushing him into open air, 2 members of his family who never came out. The Hindenburg fell in 32 seconds. The faith that held it up had taken decades to build. Only one of them could be recovered. The ship is long gone. The warning it left is not. If you want the record set straight, subscribe to Errata.